Hi everybody and welcome to today's episode of SEO in the Shed, which is a PPC and SEO special. Thanks so much for joining us on this gloriously sunny Friday lunchtime. I'm very happy and mildly surprised to see so many people dialing in. And John was joking earlier that it's not SEO in the shed today, it's SEO in the sauna, as your shed is a little warm, is it not, John?
45 degrees, Sophie, absolutely roasting. My dog has passed out on the floor. We'll get through it.
Yeah, it is looking a little bit like a Swedish sauna in there. But anyway, on to today's topic, which is a subject I'm really passionate about: how to blend PPC and SEO strategies to boost search ROI and maximize audience growth. So this is something we hear talked about all the time, something really difficult to get right, and we wanted to give you a few tips today of some initial steps you could take to working towards a blended PPC and SEO strategy. So before we go any further, I just wanted to introduce you to the experts on the call today. So we have John, obviously our SEO in the Shed expert. John, for those of you who don't know and aren't kind of regular listeners of the webinar, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I'm John Earnshaw. I'm the Chief Product Evangelist at Datametrics, as you can see by the T-shirt. Nice T-shirt, Sophie. And I have worked in organic SEO for over 20 years now. And my role is about going out, talking to clients, understanding what they need, and just making sure they are getting the most out of the platform. So pleasure to be here.
Great, thanks. And James, can you give yourself a quick intro as well, please?
Hi, yes, I'm James from Kinase. I'm an account director and analytics director. I've been working in paid search and web analytics for about 7 years, and been working with many clients sort of across the UK and internationally, and focusing on a lot of the problems that we've been seeing, especially over the last couple of years, in terms of dealing with or tackling with all of these problems that we're going to be talking about today.
Great, thank you. And I'm Sophie. I'm the head of product and marketing at Datametrics, but the reason I'm so excited in particular for today's webinar is I used to be a customer of both Kinase and Pi when I worked at Clark's, and both companies supported us in driving a really successful blended search strategy. So I'm huge advocates of both companies. So let's get into what we're covering today. So we've obviously gone through some introductions of individuals, but we'll give you a bit of background of Pi and Kinase history and expertise as well. Why blending PPC and SEO can help your overall search ROI, which is obviously what we're all striving towards. Initial steps you can get started on this journey. I think it seems like such a big topic, so we just want to give some first initial steps that can get you going on this journey. The best way to conduct analytics and attribution for driving performance. Some ideas for optimization that can benefit search overall, and then a few case studies of who's doing this well and where we've seen them be really successful. And if we've got time at the end, we'll go through some Q&A for those on the call as well. So John, do you want to give a quick 10-15 second introduction to Datametrics?
15 seconds. Okay. I think it's safe to say that we are the leaders in the organic search intelligence space. We've got this incredible platform called Pi that helps our clients win in search, understand the search landscape, get clear visibility of the competition, and discover revenue opportunities. So if you haven't tried it, I think you should.
Brilliant, thank you. And James, what about Kinase?
Yep, again, trying to stick to 15 seconds. So Kinase is a medium-sized independent performance marketing agency. We're based in London, and we have a team of about 100 specialists working across many different areas. We started off in 2010, initially focusing on paid search, but progressed into paid social, display, YouTube, Amazon, programmatic, and web analytics. We have both a national and international client base, working with leading brands such as Goldsmiths, Lovehoney, Dreams, and Nisbets.
Nice. Thank you. Very good and swift introductions from both of you, so thanks. So let's get into the content. Why is blending PPC and SEO so important, and how can it massively help your ROI for search overall? So we're going to go through a few points of why we all believe we're better working together than we are as separate disciplines. The first point being it's not necessarily efficient or effective to compete with each other in the SERPs. So John on the call has done a huge amount of analysis around how detrimental it is to compete against your own organic content in the SERPs. John, do you want to give us a quick overview of that?
Yeah, absolutely, Sophie. Yeah, we did some research a few months back, and things haven't changed since then. And we looked at lost revenue opportunities with some of the leaders from our leaderboard. So these are businesses that do really well. And we discovered that 70% of the time that they were losing money by not having content on page one was down to cannibalization. And that's just not thinking about your own ecosystem. And in the same sense, what we need to do is start thinking and take a greater care of the relationship between paid and organic. And that's what we're doing here today. And before I go off on one, I just want to say it's so great that we are talking here today, because so many times people talk about blended search, talk about getting together, we all agree in the room and we go our separate ways. But that's not what today's about.
Yeah. Exactly, and I just think that stat is crazy, that 70% of lost revenue of opportunity is actually down to competing with yourself, not your competitor.
Yeah.
So crazy stats. Another great reason to work together is we both have access to this huge pool of customer intent data, and it's great to share that. And I think, James, you've got some really good views on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's paid search is in a really unique position at the moment, and it has been over the course of, especially over the last few years, where we get a huge amount of insight in terms of what's going on with our customer base, what they're searching for, and not specifically just down to the terms, but the categories and areas that they're looking at. And we can use and leverage this information to get beyond just these sort of broad and generalist insights that sort of Google would share, and get more sort of deep in the detail with our customer base. What is it that they care about? What insights can we share? So by using this, we can then leverage it with our organic strategies. We can share that information across and get an idea of where should the focus areas be.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think a big part of that is obviously any kind of audience analytics, which we'll move on to in a second as well. Another reason for working really well together is potentially you have different roles to play throughout a customer lifetime journey, or different roles for seasonality. And John, you said you were doing some testing around this with content, organic content, and putting some page strategy behind testing whether it would succeed or not at different times of seasonality. Do you want to run through that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely, Sophie. And I know, James, you're going to talk about content hubs as well, because everybody, and they're going to be mentioned a few times, I think, during this call, everybody's talking about content hubs, and everybody's saying to the organic team, what content should we create? What keywords should we target? And we've got organic teams doing all of that work, doing the research that we do, and then making an informed decision. But what if we actually worked with the paid team and said, hey guys, why don't you create some content, some different types of content to test that and see what's working and what's not? What's getting a high click-through but a high bounce rate? We know we need to steer clear of that. What's working? What's getting the long dwell times? What content is a match for intent? And then we can take that and we can build that back, so it's not just organic doing all the work. I think that's a simple, really cool way of working together, and it benefits everyone.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we've got a chart now, which is an example of where we think different channels can be played really smartly in different areas of seasonality and customer journey. So we have a search trend chart here for the category smart tech and phones. This is actually a category where you see really repeatable trends every year of when they dip in search volume, when they increase in search volume, and when the kind of peak is. And if there's nothing too huge impacting it year on year, it's relatively the similar trends. It's something I worked with both Pi and Kinase in when I was working at Clark's, is planning out when different channels can really help kick in different parts of that search volume trend. So there are certain plans where you can go, certain times where you can go through all the planning stuff that John was just talking about, all the testing stuff, use when those trends and those volumes are rising to go through an influence strategy. So search volume might not necessarily be incredibly high then, CPCs might be not as high as they'll be at peak. So you can start getting people to your website and getting that audience engagement. So when it is peak time for people actually purchasing those products, you can use more efficient channels where the CPCs are really high in a really competitive time. So that's a time that's really good to be using retargeting, email campaigns, and maximizing the benefits of all that organic content that you've created as well. And then after peak, evaluating whether or not you think this is going to be a repeat trend, so you can keep all of that content and all of those strategies live, or whether you think that's just a one-off annual thing that's never going to happen again, so you can focus your efforts elsewhere. So that's just a really brief overview of a strategy we've taken with loads of our customers about optimizing different channels at different times and the success that can bring you. If you're interested in this, we've got multiple blog posts on it, which we'll share following the webinar. And then finally, which I think John has slightly covered already, but testing intent and target audiences. So did you have anything further you wanted to add to that, John?
Yeah, on the intent in particular, Sophie, again, there's too much dependence on organic to inform what the intent is. And we always talk about create content that's a match for intent. So you can take many learnings from the search landscape, but also you can do things so much more quickly with paid search by creating 4 different types. Imagine you've got some informational, navigational, transactional, local, intent content. Well, which one works the best? Very quickly, within a few days, you could take that back, and we know not only what to focus on organic, but we can also verify that as well. It's just a smart way of testing.
Particularly with audience insights, right? Because that's something we actually don't have any intel in from organic search, but you guys do, right, James?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a key part of our strategy now is very much focusing on, and it's always been very audience focused, paid search. There's always been a long background of using extensive amounts of cookies and data to try and inform our audiences. But now more than ever is using our first party data, picking out our top customers, our top 10% lifetime value, all of these highly valuable customers, and understanding what is it that they're searching for, what is it that they need. And then we can orient our content around that, because we can do it based on the overall search volumes that we're seeing. But if we can base it on actually what our top search is looking for, that can be much more impactful and much more valuable.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and it brings us back to that point we were talking about before the call, which is focus. So obviously we have all the search trend data, and we apply our own IP on top of that as well around the most valuable types of searches. But being able to layer that audience intent data over the top of that, I mean, most SEOs should be biting your hand off for that data.
Exactly. And doesn't all this sound obvious when we're talking about it, guys? And why is it? Yeah, it is. So why is it that this doesn't happen when it's just all benefit?
Yeah, and I think we'll move a little bit onto that later, how we can take some first steps into actually making sure this gets done. The final point on here was just moving beyond single click tracking, which James is an expert in and going to give us a little bit of information about now.
Yeah, so with the ecosystem that we're in, I mean, essentially we're in a position now where, years ago everybody was looking at last click attribution, and everybody now acknowledges that last click is no longer necessarily the best thing to be doing. It's a very sort of simple and very easy view to access, but we acknowledge that it's something that we need to step away from. And so we're getting more and more into these views of having longer and more complex journeys. We understand that users are searching in the ways that they want to search, and we can ensure that we're essentially appearing for and designing our content around where they're going to be searching for and what they need the most. There's also, with all of the industry changes and challenges we're seeing around tracking and cookies, we can't rely as much on having a very clear and detailed journey for all of our customers. So we need to look at how different areas are influencing each other on a much more macro level, so we can then tie these insights together and understand what is working, what isn't working. And it's not as simple as that same, as we said before, last click or single channel view. We need to understand what's actually having the best sort of incremental impacts in terms of our investment, regardless of where they're converting. We need to be looking at how we're driving channel to direct, to organic, to all of these different areas, and just make sure we're getting the most out of our investment.
And I think to do that, that has to be an acceptance across all channels, right? Not just PPC or SEO, but across all channels, that it doesn't matter, like exactly what you said, James, where they convert, who gets that kind of last click credit, but how are we maximizing overall ROI, right?
Exactly. Because one of the challenges is you can set off and have the best intentions of doing this as a business, but then if you say, actually, our last click ROAS is looking quite low, we need to then adjust, and then you need to position your strategy back to it. So it needs to be that wider, more holistic view. And we need to be taking into consideration how paid search is influencing organic, and how organic is driving towards paid search as well. So it needs to be about how all the channels are working together rather than those single individual silos.
there's a bit of a communication piece back to the business of that as well then, because obviously all of the channels have their own individual targets anyway. So as you said, if you're seeing a reduction in ROAS, or if you're even seeing a reduction in orders or sales from one of the channels, there's got to be an acceptance within your department or within your business that you're working towards this overall optimization strategy, right?
Exactly. It needs to be a common goal between the groups, because essentially you're going to have instances where you're taking sales away, or instances where actually it's much more efficient to leave and not to serve ads in those instances and let it go through to organic. But while you're looking at it individual silos, it's almost incentivizing that behavior essentially. So yeah, having that more holistic, more joined up view is definitely what's required there.
Great. I could talk about this all day, but I think we better move on. So as we've said, and John said, all of this seems not necessarily obvious, but it seems like it all makes sense and everyone can agree that this is a better way of doing it. But there are stumbling blocks in the way, and it is quite a hard thing to get right. And we're seeing not all businesses necessarily optimizing in the correct way. I mean, everyone's been to events where they say we don't need to work in silos anymore, we need to be more collaborative. You all go away and have a workshop and agree, and then that's kind of where it ends. So we wanted to put together some really initial steps you can take. The first being just being really aligned in your objectives. So when we're talking about search strategies, PPC or SEO, I think sometimes we're forgetting what is it that we're trying to drive the business we're working for. Is there a specific objective that we're trying to get to? Is it just more orders, more sales, higher margin? Are we trying to attract a different type of customer? Are we trying to push a different type of product? What is it that really clear objective that collectively you can make a difference on, and that you've both got an aligned plan for? And then create those focus areas. What is it that we can focus on together that's going to make the biggest difference against that objective? So James gave a great example earlier about using paid search audience analysis to look at the top 10 most engaged in content pieces from a particularly valuable audience type. Maybe if you just focused on those bits of content rather than everything that you're tracking and all of your keywords, you would see some really strong uplift straight away. Do either of you have anything else to add on the focus part?
Makes total. Again, it just sounds, why aren't we doing it? I keep coming back to that, because there's just, it's all benefit, it's all upside.
Yeah. The next one being audit visibility. So a great way to encourage collaboration, I've always found, isn't to ask someone for help, but it's to offer help to them. So how can paid and organic search teams help each other be more visible and have overall visibility for the brand? So auditing visibility can include things like setting up alerts. So when you drop out of key positions organically, your paid ads immediately trigger. Or if you become really visible for a topic and you're owning multiple features in the SERPs organically, maybe you could save your paid team some of that budget that they could reinvest into more acquisition type terms. How can you make sure that between you've got maximum visibility at all times?
Yeah, and for us, that's where it all started, Sophie, I think, with the visibility auditing. And we'll talk about a case study in a bit, but it was those alerts, those triggers. It's, hey, we've dropped off page one, let's do something about it from a paid perspective. So, you know, that's got a special place in my heart, that one.
Yeah, using each other tactically. And then I think this is a really key one as well. So it really rolls in the customer journey and the handover points. And I think you were talking a bit about this, James, before the call. And again, it just helps being super clear who's responsible for what, who's delivering which part of the strategy, and then you don't get too many clashes with your you know, claiming kind of credit for those results or that attribution. Did you have any further opinions on that?
Yeah, I think the main thing to call out here is essentially that with all of this and with all of these individual areas, it just highlights there is no one size fits all strategy. Everything has to be bespoke and unique to each individual brand, and it's something that evolves and changes over time. So those roles can't be ones that are completely sort of hard stuck. You can't decide one day, right, this is the role of paid search and leave it, or this is the role of where it's going to go to organic. It needs to be flexible and it needs to react to what's going on in the wider ecosystem.
Yeah. Agree. So it's not so much set templated, you're doing this, I'm doing this. It's more reactional kind of tactics. When X happens, what's our strategy, right?
Definitely. And the only way that works is with communication, with sharing that data, sharing those insights, so you can understand when that needs to shift. Because ultimately, what we're all aiming for is driving the most incremental revenue that we can. So looking at how we can approach that is going to just change and develop over time with all of the various changes in the wider market.
Yeah, brilliant. So suggested tactics for success. So as we were saying, take away budget from areas where you have strong organic visibility and use that to test or work on more acquisition keywords or have specific purpose, for example, final conversion pushes. So at no point are we trying to reduce the paid search budget here. We're trying to use the budget we have to maximize, as James said, overall growth. Are there places where we've already got great visibility organically and we can use some of that budget to expand our audience type or expand our reach for certain products, and use that budget a little more effectively, which, as we said, might potentially reduce your ROAS for some of your campaigns, but overall will lead to greater visibility and greater traffic.
Yeah. I was going to say on that one, Sophie, sorry, I remember having a conversation with a particular client, and the first time we had the conversation about collaboration, we unfortunately talked about making savings and reducing budget, and that went south, that conversation. So I went away and thought about it, and we came back and we had a similar conversation a couple of weeks later where there was no reduction, it was just about efficiencies, and that went so differently. So you're so right, it's not necessarily reducing budget, because people are very protective of their budgets, and rightly so.
Yeah, of course. And I think even if you're, as we said, some of your campaigns might have a reduced ROAS, if your overall ROI is greater, then it's more of a business case than ever to increase your paid budgets rather than decrease them.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what happened at Clark's. As we talked about, just a recap, set up automated alerts and bids based on changes in your visibility, just to make sure you've got that maximum coverage for your opportunity terms, your risk mitigation terms, and just everything obviously must be data-led. So you need to prove and be confident that you're driving incrementality through all of the new tactics that you're delivering, and that's a great way to communicate back to the business. From working together, we've seen these incremental collective gains, and we're going to keep working together in this way rather than having separate teams and separate goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to get James to take the lead on this chapter. So analytics and attribution for driving performance and collaboration. Obviously, you're Director of Analytics at Kinase, James. So what are your top tips for doing this well and reporting?
Yeah, so in terms of the approach for this, there are different levels that you need to consider when you're looking at how you're either sharing data, how you're informing overall strategy, and just the insights and learnings that you're using. So starting at sort of the very bottom, when we're thinking about how we can best share data to enhance, there's some really sort of simple approaches we can take with just taking data straight out of Google Ads, looking at the top performing keywords, looking at where we're seeing high CPCs, but actually then also high engagement with the website after the fact as being key areas which would have a high value if we can significantly reduce the cost in those areas. So we can look at a sort of a very basic level on how we can approach that. And then as we get much more macro, we then need to think about overall strategy and how we design and push our campaigns. That's where we need to lean on tools like Kinase Impact Navigator tool, which essentially allows us to look at how we're investing our paid search activity, how it's driving then in terms of top line for both paid and organic revenue, and understanding how should that be invested and how it should be different. So by adopting all of the things that we've been talking about so far, you can then test it and see, right, how is this working? When we optimize to a unified view, actually, how much more revenue are we getting, or whatever our main KPI is at the time, how much more are we actually driving out of this? And then there's also, as we sort of step back and sort of look more to the future, we're going to be seeing less and less reliable data as cookies become deprecated, as we have a less direct track that we can follow. So we need to use modeled and matched data to help to enhance our reporting. And that's then where things and tools and platforms like GA4 come in, where we can essentially then tie back and look at, okay, we're missing a load of data now because we can't actually, people haven't opted into consenting to marketing cookies. How can we use the data that we do have to extrapolate out and see what we're doing for the wider picture? And that will be really important for understanding what pages are performing best, what audiences are doing well for us, all of that insight.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And do you find that when that collaborative reporting is done properly, is there quite positive receptiveness from businesses that you're talking to?
Definitely. There's a lot of initial challenge because initially, whenever you're changing your approach in terms of when we're looking specifically within paid search, a lot of paid search is geared up for just maximizing that last click metric. The moment you step away from that, there is inevitably a last click decline because it's now less efficient at optimizing towards that. But you see the overall and top line metric improve. So it's really just, you have to be so clear on what the expectations are going to be going into it, that you're going to see this decline from a last click perspective, but actually looking at the wider system and wider picture, this is the uplift that we're expecting to see and approaching it in that manner.
Yeah, brilliant. It's super interesting. And of course, as well as working collaborative, there are ideas obviously that you can both do to optimize overall search. Even if you're doing them separately, it's going to help your overall search strategy. So John kind of lives and breathes this stuff, so I'm going to let him pick out a couple of these things you can do to impact your overall search strategy that's going to be positive for both. Take it away, John.
Yeah, and I promise just to deal with a couple of these. They're all amazing. Given the time. Okay, people also ask, and related searches, 2 features that bring you so close to the intent of your audience. We know people also ask the questions that Google thinks are on the mind of the searcher. We find that in the organic landscape. We can pass that on to the paid team so they can create content that much more effectively matches the intent of the searcher. James, is that something you're doing now at all, using people also ask?
It's very limited in how we're using people also ask, but there is a huge amount of potential in terms of what we can do there. But it's the insight, it all comes down to the insight sharing. If we're not receiving those insights, we can't enact and utilize them, but it's a huge potential there.
Amazing, and that's down to us, the organic guys, to actually get that straight across to you. So that's people who also ask. Related searches as well, something that you can pull from Pi. I always call related searches being one step closer to the money. This is the infamous 0 click, but these are searches that people have made. Again, if you're using Pi, you can extract that data. We can pass that on to you, so you can actually use that either for keywords or for content. And then one more I'm just going to mention, algorithm reaction strategies. We all know what happened on the 25th of May. Google rolled out their core. There was another little blip about 10 days later. We can talk about that another time. But if you've gone south, thanks to the May core, it's an obvious choice to inform the paid team where we've lost out. There's 1, 2, 3, or 4 positions. It's an obvious time to communicate. So yeah, I'll stop right there, Sophie.
Yeah, I know, I just noticed the time, so as I said, I could talk about this all day, but I'm going to rest. I'm sure everyone's desperate to get out in the sun for lunch. So just finish with a couple of case studies of who's doing this well, and then we can summarize. So John, we've seen some really strong results when we conducted some of this work with Virgin, right?
Yeah, totally. We were working with one of the Virgin divisions at the time. It was the first time we worked closely with their paid team. We basically created some middleware through which we fed data from our API, fed into their double-click bid engine, and within 3 months, they made a 34% efficiency saving. They thought it was phenomenal. We thought it was phenomenal, and it was just, a great case study in using data at scale, feeding from one to another. So it can be done.
Can be done. And James, you've seen some really good successes with your work with Dreams, right?
Yeah, so previously Dreams were working on this huge content hub that they had on their website, and essentially what we did is we were able to tap into this content hub with some of our paid search adverts. We were able to pull insights and terms out of there to use for targeting, and initially we'd intended it as just seeing sort of if there's some upper funnel terms in there that we could leverage, but actually it turned out to be incredibly effective and incredibly profitable because it opened up terms in areas that weren't previously deemed to be competitive. Competitors weren't being aggressive in those spaces. There were long tail terms, and we were able to direct people to the right places on the content hub, which then proved to be actually incredibly profitable.
Amazing. And as I said at the start of this call, we saw great successes from doing this stuff with Clarks, the main use case being setting up automated bids to kick in when we were losing high value organic visibility. So there are case studies for Virgin and Clarks on our website, and I'm sure Kinase will be happy to provide more information about the Dreams work if you want to get in touch afterwards. So just a quick summary of takeaways. So obviously ensure businesses understand the importance of total search view, why it can drive more sales or leads, and that collective view of reporting so you're not competing against each other. Concrete shared projects, so conversion rate optimization, querying question strategies, KPI workshops and creative strategies, just so you're all involved in the build of the strategy, not just the reporting of it, so you're all sold in and working on it collectively. And as we've kind of hammered home quite a lot in this webinar, align your reporting so you can report the success back in an aligned way and celebrate your successes together rather than, again, competing against one another for those attribution stats. Thanks so much for joining everybody today. We've had a huge uptake on the webinar today. I think this might be our highest attended webinar all year, so that's amazing. If you're interested in the work that either Pi or Kinase can do for you and for your company, then Holly, who works in our team, who's running everything in the background, has put links for a demo sign up to Pi Datametrics, where one of our solution experts will be happy to take you through how we think Pi can help optimize your organic strategy. And likewise, there's also a link in there for Kinase services. Kinase run an amazing free audit service to help you get in the right direction straight away. I'd highly recommend taking them up on that because they're amazing. I can advocate for them. John and James, thank you so much for joining us today. Did you have any closing thoughts?
James, you go first.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's the main takeaway from this for me is this is an incredibly big opportunity for everyone here. It's one of those areas where everybody is very, as John touched on earlier, everybody's very keen and they know it's something that we need to be doing, but actually the movement hasn't started and we haven't sort of necessarily made that progress. So my recommendation would be just get a conversation in, get something started with it. Note that no one size fits all solution is out there. You need to develop this and work on this yourself, but there's a huge amount of opportunity out there.
Amazing, thanks. What about you, John?
It's a no-brainer. We've just got to do it. We've just got to not only get in a room and say we're going to work together, but as you can see, these are just some of the things that we've shared that we know work, that will save efficiencies, that will make money. And yeah, if people have got some questions or more of the details, then they can come through to James, yourself, Sophie, or to myself, and we can share more details. So let's just do it.
Great, thanks. We've got a couple of questions. One just being, will the slides be provided? So everyone that signed up to this webinar will send through a follow-up email with the slides and the recording. So I think that's it. Thanks again for attending, and I hope you will have a lovely sunny rest of your days, Fridays, and you're not working too hard, and enjoy your weekends. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
cheers.
thank you.
Bye.